Good morning, Rabotai. Today is the Hilula of Rabbi Yishak Benoualid. And we've spoken in the past on his tremendous scholarship. We have one whole shiur dedicated to the will and testament that he left at the end of his life. I want to relate today his connection to the different Gedolim and Tzaddikim that were at the time that he knew about. In other words, Rabbi Yishak was born in Tetwan in 1770 and lived all the way in 1777, all the way till 1870, and he had a correlation with many of the different tzaddikim of the time, even though he was in North Africa. His sefer got all the way to the Ben Ishchai. The Ben Ishchai writes in Shelot Uchuvot Rav Pe'alim Orach Chaim Chelek Bet Siman Chav Bet that he wrote a whole teshuvah, and after he wrote whatever subject he wrote about, he says, after I wrote all this, a copy of a teshuvah from the sefer Vayomer Yitzchak from the Rav, the Mofet Hador, the wonder of the generation of Yishak Benoualid. Rabbi Refailan Kawat, chief rabbi of Morocco, was known that this was the go-to sefer to be posek halachot in Choshen Mishpat. Like it's written in a few places. He has a sefer called Pa'amon Verimon, where he writes, now that you see that Vayomer Yitzchak wrote about this subject, even though we could bring from other poskim, since we found that he wrote already in this, we don't need to write even more. He writes this in Karnei Re'em, in Chelek Aleph Siman Membet. He writes this in Teshuvat Rabbi David Sabach, in Shoshanim LeDavid, Chelek Bet Siman Ayin. Writes it's a Hilchata de Meshicha that you don't have to discuss more once you see that it was discussed by Rabbi Yishak Benoualid. This was the great honor that they attributed to him. Rav Avram Palaji in Sefer Vaya'an Avraham writes something very similar in Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Henata or zarach nechmad vayomer Yitzchak le'arav mufla medorenu, the wonder of the generation, the light of the West, Rabbi Yishak Benoualid, and he goes on and on. You see that the Rishon LeZion at the time, Rav Yaakov Shaul Eliashir, also had correspondence and wrote about his greatness. He's very well respected. One of the reasons and traits why I think that he had such tremendous respect was his humility. I mentioned last night at the Hilula that in his will and testament he was adamant that in Otchet, that the Darshan shouldn't say any midot or titles about him. And remember, this is someone that you see all these Gedolim are quoting, besides for the fact that he would read Tehillim every single week and Shisha Sidrei Mishnah when he would be healthy, and he had Yisurin in his body, and he carried the load of the community to judge between man and his fellow friend. That's what he asked out of his tremendous levels. We think we're such big hotshots, and we try to show off. This is Rabbi Yishak Benoualid, that he had all of the ma'alot, and he still remained with this tremendous humility. One gadol that he was in touch with that I just found out this year, and I thank Rabbi Shlomo Dayan from Harnof, who has a Beit Knesset, Toldot Yitzchak, that he sent me the document of this, that he had a connection between him and Rav Yehuda Shmuel Ashkenazi. Rav Yehuda Shmuel Ashkenazi was the author of a few Sfarim, but he's most well known for his Sidur Bet Oved and Bet Menucha, which is a very popular Sidur that was used in Morocco, in Syria, in Italy, in many different places. It was printed in Livorno. Rav Yehuda Shmuel Ashkenazi was from Eretz Yisrael, from Tiberia, but he traveled in the year 1828 to Tetwan, and there he became very good friends with Rabbi Yishak Benoualid. And he traveled again in 1837, and he also made a tremendous connection with him. There he gave him his sefer called Geza Yishai. Geza Yishai, I recently came across for the Bet Oved. It's a tremendous pilpul. It's a very deep sefer that discusses all types of inyanim. The first chapter where he discusses is, are you allowed to create a golem on Shabbat through Shemot Hashem, and whether that golem is created, what would happen if you tell him to do something on Shabbat. It's very relevant to AI. I spoke about this and I quoted the Geza Yishak. It's very relevant to the robots nowadays, and there's a lot of, it's a different subject, but it's definitely connected to that. So either way, where it's written in one of the Sfarim of the Chachmei Morocco, of the Tzfona, from the north of Morocco, Sefer Mishpatim Tzadikim, Chelek Bet. He writes that Rav Yaakov Kalfon, when he got the Sefer Geza Yishai, he had a lot of critiques on it, a lot of different critiques. So he wrote them all up, and then he showed them Rabbi Yishak Benoualid. Rabbi Yishak Benoualid said, "No way. You're allowed to discuss in Torah, but you have to do it a little bit. I think from what I understand, it had to be toned down." So he rewrote his critiques, and he wrote it in a way, I just want to discuss in learning with Rav Yehuda Shmuel Ashkenazi, the author of the Geza Yisha, the author of the Bet Oved. Either way, they had a very close relationship. Didn't know that, and that's fascinating. And the Bet Oved is one of the Sidurim that has so many halachot. In Morocco, they would be posek according to the Bet Oved. So that was the relationship between Rabbi Yishak Benoualid and the Bet Oved. And he was very strong about giving musar at the time to people who did not follow what they were supposed to, even though it is tremendous humility. For example, he gives critique on a certain man that unfortunately was in an illicit relationship with a goya. And he explains, this is in Even Ezer Siman. There was one in Siman Gimel, but he discusses how the tremendous damage that is done by somebody who went to illicit relationships. He writes this. I'll tell you the exact Siman Even Ezer Siman Mem Gimel. Hatoava gdola azot anasid b'Yisrael. How because of this the galut is just going to take longer, especially in our generations that we are so close to the Geula. He writes. So we're even closer then, and therefore he doesn't, when he has to, he doesn't restrain himself. He spoke about dayanim, that they have to be, before they give a judgment, they have to be proficient in their knowledge. He was giving tochacha musar in another place about people getting proper burial. He made sure that in his ktavim, despite the fact his humility, that he had strength in relating the message when it was necessary. So that should be a tremendous chut upon us. Amen. Ken Yiratzon.